Hello, everybody. I don't know if anybody's here, but I'm here. I'm everybody, I guess. Welcome. It has been a while since we did some Pride and Prejudice. Hold on a second. Oh.
This cat is being weird. He's being weird today. I think he wants something, but I don't know. I don't know what he wants. Oh, thank you. Alright, that better? I don't know what you want.
He keeps coming up to me and looking at me expectantly. But I don't know what he's after.
Right? I don't know. Will you stay here? Will you stay here and be cute?
Nah, you can't see him anymore, can you? But welcome, Death said. I don't think I said that. And there he goes. Off again. He's probably gonna come back again and meow. But yes, it has been a little bit since we have done some Pride and Prejudice, but everyone is asking for it, so it seems like it's the way to go. Which I am super happy about, that people seem to be enjoying this series. I got a comment, I think it's actually my first comment on the YouTube channel, of somebody saying that this is their favorite book and they're excited to read more. So I was so happy about that. And if you're in the audience, or in the audience, that's awesome. If you're in the audience or the audience, then welcome. Glad to have you here. And we also had a new person join the... I don't know if it's the same person, but we also had a new person join the Discord because they found the videos on YouTube. And so that makes me super happy. So also welcome to you if you are here in either the audience or the audience. So yeah, I'm excited to be reading some more. Oh yes, and the other thing I was going to say is that if you are on the Discord and you would like to be pinged when I upload VODs, make sure that you go into the channels and roles and check the VOD squad. The VOD squad will be for the main channel, so that will be the writing group stuff, the literature stuff, like the classical literature stuff, and whenever I get the book club made, then it'll be that as well. And then for gaming, I think, did I just call that gaming VODs? I think I did. Oh yeah, I literally say see main channel VODs and see gaming VODs. Okay, I was clear. Good. I should realize that I will do that. No, I don't want split screen. I just want to move it. Okay, there we go. There is an ad break coming, FYI. So yes, if you like, I think a lot of people enjoy these Pride and Prejudice videos, but also miss them. And so if you want to watch those VODs, make sure that you get that ping. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, I guess I might have talked about this before, but I wish that I could stream more during the day. I don't have the setup during the day because this tripod that I use for this camera, hello, is my dad's, and he's using it at work, and so I want to buy another tripod so that I could potentially stream during the day and not have to rely on using his. But that is part of why these are so sporadic, so hopefully it gets better in the future. But yes, welcome audience and audience. Great to have you here. Let us begin.
Hello, Bo. You have returned.
Okay. Is that big enough, or do you want it a little bigger? Maybe something to invest in when the first Discord Twitch deposits come in. Yeah, indeed. Hello, Mako Kim. Alright. So, last time, we were introduced to, I think it was Colin Williams? I think that was his name? William Collins, the opposite. That's funny. Colin Williams. Okay, there's an ad going on. William Collins. He was at least I voiced him as a snooty little dude who, well, actually, like, he's introduced as the man who's gonna take the house away from the girls when Mr. Bennet dies, and so already we are primed to not like him. And he sends a letter, and he's like, I'm, like, a minister now. I forget what position he holds, but, I'm, like, a minister now, and I want to atone for the sins of my father. That is not the voice I gave him. I want to atone for the sins of my father. And he wanted to make amends, but when he arrives, he does not seem that interested in making amends. In fact, he seems much more interested in marrying one of the Bennet daughters. And I think he thinks that that's going to solve everything. That he still gets the house, but also they get the house, and so nobody has to be upset. But, you know, it's kind of gross. It's not cool. It's especially gross because he has his eyes on Elizabeth. Elizabeth is our girl, and she's Mr. Darcy's girl. We know that. We know that's coming. So, no, Mr. Collins. She is not for you. So, I believe that's kind of where we left off. I think there was something about the army dudes that I think Collins was, like, reading, like, a passage from the Bible or something, and then Lydia's like, oh, our army crushes are coming in tomorrow, and he was just fuming when she interrupted. So, yeah, I think that might be part of it. Let me take a quick look at the previous passage. Oh, yeah, they went into town, and then wasn't it that I remember Mr. Bennet was like, I want some peace and quiet. My library is my sanctuary. It is being taken over by this snot-nosed little brat. I want my peace and quiet. Take him into town. And so they did, and then they go talk to this Mrs. Phillips, and she invites the girls for dinner or something, and she invites him too, and he's like, oh, she's so nice, like, she invited me when I was a stranger, and it's like, you were there, like, you were in the room, would be rude of her to be like, everyone's invited, not you, though. And there was also talk about, Lady Catherine, that she's the one who is, like, his mentor, and she helped him, like, get a job as a minister, and he speaks very highly of her, and he's like, oh, her daughter is, like, the best, but I think she's, like, sick or something. So I think he, like, wanted to marry her, but there was a reason that wasn't going to be advantageous to him. Yeah, oh, no political marriages up in here. I mean, that too, but it's more like, no cousin marriages up in here. Alright. Well, I haven't heard any complaints on the size so far, so I think I will begin, like this. Alright. Chapter 16. As no objection was made to the young people's engagement with their aunt, and all Mr. Collins's scruples of leaving Mr. and Mrs. Bennet for a single evening during his visit were most steadily resisted, the coach conveyed him and his 5 cousins at a suitable hour to Meryton, and the girls had the pleasure of hearing, as they entered the drawing-room, that Mr. Wickham had accepted their uncle's invitation, and was then in the house. Oh, there's like a whole thing where this is the army dudes, right? That a new army dude was introduced. I think that's Mr. Wickham, and Mr. Darcy shows up, and they like stare daggers at each other for a second and move on, and it's like, oh, there's a story here, but it's not addressed. Oh, gotcha. Nico says political was the only thing I could think of. Missed them being cousins. Gotcha. Um, so I think that's who we're talking about. All right. When this information was given and they had all taken their seats, Mr. Collins was at leisure to look around him and admire, and he was so much struck with the size and furniture of the apartment that he declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlor at Rosings, a comparison that did not at first convey much gratification. But when Mrs. Phillips understood from him what Rosings was, and who was its proprietor, when she had listened to the description of only one of Lady Catherine's drawing rooms, and found that the chimney piece alone had cost £800, she felt all the force of the compliment, and would hardly have resented a comparison with the housekeeper's room. Nice. I think I'm going to make it a little bigger. Actually, not that much bigger. That is a great way to write that. Like, when she learned of only one of her drawing rooms, it was okay. In describing to her all the grandeur of Lady Catherine and her mansion, with occasional digressions in praise of his own what? Humble abode. Oh yes, so humble. And the improvements it was receiving, he was happily employed until the gentleman joined them. I assume that means Mr. Wickham. And he found in Mrs. Phillips a very attentive listener, whose opinion, of his consequence increased with what she had heard, and who was resolving to retail it all among her neighbors as soon as she could. Wait, hold on. No, stop it. Would this be enough? Maybe. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think she just wants to brag about, like, oh, I got this compliment about my house, I guess. To the girls who could not listen to their cousin and who had nothing to do but to wish for an instrument and examine their own indifferent imitations of china on the mantelpiece, the interval of waiting appeared very long. They really like to use that instrument thing. Like, what was the sentence before where it was like, I'm getting out the instrument, and you know what that means. And it's like, no, what does that mean? And they're doing, like, they could do nothing but wish for an instrument. And this one's a little better, because it's like, okay, like, wish for some music, wish to play some music. But it still has that air of, like, what? Like, are we wishing for a harp? Are we wishing for a drill? What Are we wishing for an instrument of murder? Of a knife? What are we wishing for here? I do like the image of them just, like, examining the china or the imitations of china on the mantelpiece. It's like, we have nothing to do but to look at the china. Look at the china and wish for an undisclosed instrument. It was over at last, however. The gentleman did approach, and when Mr. Wickham walked into the room, Elizabeth felt that she had neither been seeing him before nor thinking of him since with the smallest degree of unreasonable admiration. That seemed like a lot of negatives. She hadn't been seeing him before or thinking of him since with the smallest degree of unreasonable admiration. So either that means she doesn't admire him at all, or she's saying, like, I admire him, and it is very reasonable in my assumptions. The officers of the Shire were, in general, a very creditable, gentlemanlike set, and the best of them were of the present party. Mr. Wickham was as far beyond them all in person, countenance, air, and walk as they were superior to the broad-faced, stuffy Uncle Phillips. Breathing port wine followed them into the room. Okay, so it sounds like it is negative, that the other officers are great, but Mr. Wickham is, like, even worse than... Wait, hold on. like Uncle Phillips is over here, you know, drinking and being smelly, and the officers are leagues above him. And then maybe it isn't negative, because that could mean Mr. Wickham, as far as they are from Uncle Phillips, Mr. Wickham is above them. Like, he's awesome. Or it means he's, you know, the worst. I don't know. Also, I'm assuming that they just, like, it's, like, I don't know, like Devonshire or something like that, and they cut out the Devon for some reason, but I kind of love the image that they're all hobbits. That they're all, like, oh yeah, like, Hobbiton has they have their army now, and and they're all here, you know, to woo the Bennett ladies. Alright. Let's move you up a little. Mr. Wickham was the happy man towards whom almost every female eye was turned. Okay, so it does seem like he's handsome. Handsome and great. And Elizabeth was the happy woman by whom he finally seated himself. Ooh-hoo-hoo. In the agreeable manner in which he immediately fell into conversation, though it was only on its being a wet night, and on the probability of a rainy season, made her feel that the commonest, dullest, most threadbare topic might be rendered interesting by the skill of the speaker. Interesting. So this is the first time that our Liz has shown affection for somebody. This is interesting. Especially because Mr. Darcy doesn't seem to like him, that they seem to have a past. So that's gonna be interesting. Like, if she's like, oh yeah, like, she starts pursuing a relationship with him, and Mr. Darcy's like, no, he kind of sucks, you know, and then she probably won't believe him. Alright. With such rivals for the notice of the fair as Mr. Wickham and the officers, Mr. Collins seemed likely to sink into insignificance, as he should. Good riddance. To the young ladies, he certainly was nothing, but he had still at intervals a kind listener in Mrs. Phillips, and was by her watchfulness most abundantly supplied with coffee and muffin. So, so she just, like, keeps giving him food. Okay. I mean, good hostess there. When the card tables were placed, he had an opportunity of obliging her in return by sitting down to whist. Wonder what whist means. Let's look it up. Oh, okay. A card game, an early form of bridge, but without bidding. Okay, so it's just a card game. Okay. So yeah, it's literally like sitting down to play poker, basically, like sitting down to whist.
I know little of the game at present, said he, but I shall be glad to improve myself, for in my situation of life...
Mrs. Phillips was very thankful for his compliance, but could not wait for his reason. Don't understand. Okay. Mr. Wickham did not play whist, and with ready delight was received at the other table between Elizabeth and Lydia. At first, there seemed danger of Lydia's engrossing him entirely, for she was a most determined talker. But being likewise extremely fond of lottery tickets, she soon grew too much interested in the game, too eager in making bets and exclaiming after prizes. Didn't what I just read say there was no betting? Well, it says without bidding, so I guess maybe bidding and betting isn't the same. Okay. Making bets and exclaiming after prizes to have attention for anyone in particular. That is pretty funny. That, like, the youngest, like, presumably most innocent of them, like, she's trying this whole time. Like, that's basically, her personality has basically been just going after the military dudes. And the one thing that can take her away from them, from the officers, is gambling. She's like, oh, we're gonna gamble? Sorry, Mr. Wickham, I have better things to do. Oh my goodness. Allowing for the common demands of the game, Mr. Wickham was therefore at leisure to talk to Elizabeth, and she was very willing to hear him. Though what she chiefly wished to hear, she could not hope to be told the history of his acquaintance with Mr. Darcy. Oh, she caught on, and she's interested. Ha. She dared not even mention that gentleman. Her curiosity, however, was unexpectedly relieved. Mr. Wickham began the subject himself. He inquired how far Netherfield was from Meryton, and after receiving her answer, asked in an hesitating manner how long Mr. Darcy had been staying there. Interesting. I did not expect to get the story this soon. About a month, said Elizabeth, and then, unwilling to let the subject drop, added, he is a man of very large property in Yeah? Did I say that right? I guess so. He's a man of very large property in Derbyshire. I understand. Oh, he's a man of very large property in Derbyshire. I understand. Okay. Yes, replied Wickham. His estate there is a noble one. A clear 10,000 per annum. You could not have met with a... with a person... No, there we go. With a person more capable of giving you certain information on that head than myself. For I have been connected with his family in a particular manner from my infancy. Elizabeth could not but look surprised. You may well be surprised, Miss Bennet, at such an assertion. At such an assertion, after seeing, as you probably might, the very cold manner of our meeting yesterday. That is weirdly phrased. You may well be surprised, Miss Bennet, at such an assertion, after seeing, as you probably might, the very cold manner of our meeting yesterday. Very interesting use of might in there. Are you much acquainted with Mr. Darcy? As much as I ever wish to be, cried Elizabeth warmly. That doesn't seem like a warm statement. I've spent 4 days in the same house with him, and I think him very disagreeable. I have no right to give my opinion, said Wickham, as to his being agreeable or otherwise. I'm not qualified to form one. I have known him too long and too well to be a fair judge. It is impossible for me to be impartial. But I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish, and perhaps you would not express it quite so strongly anywhere else. Here you are in your own family. Wait, so is he saying, like, no, like, that's not how most people I've met react to Mr. Darcy? But I don't know what he's saying about the family. Weird. Because, like, everybody hated him when they met him. Everybody's like, he's the worst. No. So she seems to be saying what everybody was saying, but now he seems to have a different opinion. But he just said that he knew him too well. So surely if he knows him too well, he would know this, right? That he's not very likable upon first meeting him. Upon my word, I say no more here than I might say in any house in the neighbourhood, except Netherfield. He's not at all liked in Hertfordshire. Everybody is disgusted with his pride. You will not find him more favourably spoken of by anyone. Yes, exactly. I cannot pretend to be sorry, said Wickham, after a short interruption, that he or that any man should not be estimated beyond their deserts. But with him, I believe it does not often happen. The world is blinded to his fortune and consequence, or frightened by his high and imposing manners, and sees him only as he chooses to be seen. Interesting. So I feel like I'm getting mixed signals here. Because he's saying, like, he can't pretend to be sorry that he be estimated, he's being estimated deservingly. But then he seems to be saying he's not being estimated deservingly. But it's interesting that last statement of sees him only as he chooses to be seen. So maybe he doesn't want to be liked. Which, again, supports he's just a little introvert who doesn't really like people or want to be well-liked by people. Okay, I think that's Elizabeth? I can't tell, though. I should take him, even on my slight acquaintance, to be an ill-tempered man. Wickham only shook his head. Yeah, this is something that, for today's writing, I would not recommend, because I do, especially because she said on my slight acquaintance, I think it is Elizabeth. But putting this Wickham here makes it seem like Wickham is saying it, but he's not. I wonder, said he, at the next opportunity of speaking, whether he is likely to be in this country much longer. Well, a certain lady might make him stay. I do not at all know, but I heard nothing of his going away when I was at Netherfield. I hope your plans in favor of the Shire will not be affected by his being in the neighborhood. Do you guys want me to make a sound, or should I just keep going Shire every time that comes up? Hello, said the scribe. Dropped in to say hi. Have a good read. It was great. It was great to see you. He just said, hell, said the scribe. Hello, I mean, that's hot. Sounds like a threat, and you're just trying to be nice. But yes, well, welcome and goodbye. It sounds like you're dropping in and leaving, but great to have you, even for a moment. That's where I'm headed. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. Oh my goodness. Now I'm just imagining, like, yep, I'm going to work. You know, I'm in the third circle today, sweeping chimneys. Oh yeah, that too. It says, oh no, what manner of hell retail? That could be the situation as well. That was a good bit, thank you. Alright. Let's go back. Oh, no, it is not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he wishes to avoid seeing me, he must go. We are not on friendly terms, and it always gives me pain to meet him, but I have no reason for withholding him but what I might proclaim to all the world, a sense of very great ill-usage, and most painful regrets at his being what he is. Let me reread that. So I guess he's saying, like, I'm gonna be here, and if he doesn't want to see me, then he needs to leave. He needs to, not be in the same room. It's up to him. Okay, so he's saying, like, I don't need to avoid him. If he wants to avoid me, it's on him. It's funny that, like, it's just like, it's painful that he is what he is, His father, Miss Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the best men that ever breathed, and the truest friend I ever had. That is a great compliment. One of the best men that ever breathed. Also, I don't like the Miss Bennet in there because it sounds like his father, Miss Bennet, is his father. The late Mr. Darcy, and then it seems like it's also saying Miss Bennet is the late Mr. Darcy, when it's just saying his father, addressing you, Miss Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy. Now I've lost my place. His father, Miss Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the best men that ever breathed, and the truest friend I ever had. And I can never be in company with this Mr. Darcy without being grieved to the soul by 1,000 tender recollections. His behaviour to myself has been scandalous, but I verily believe I could forgive him anything and everything, rather than his disappointing the hopes and disgracing the memory of his father. Interesting. We got some daddy issues up in here. This'll be fun. Elizabeth found the interest of the subject increase, and listened with all her heart, but the delicacy of it prevented further inquiry. That image, the interest of the subject increase, I'm just imagining, like, an interest meter by her head, and it just, like, goes up. Mr. Wickham began to speak on more general topics. Meryton, the neighborhood, the society, appearing highly pleased with all that he had yet seen, and speaking of the latter, especially with gentle but very intelligible gallantry. Um, I'm sure, I'm just imagining, like, yeah, he spoke more generally, spoke about the town, spoke about the neighborhood, spoke about all the problems of society in these days, and the weather. I don't think it's really that meant, but that's what comes to mind. Alright. Maybe it is. Let's see. It was the prospect of constant society and good society, he added, which was my chief... My chief inducement to enter the Shire. I knew it to be a most respectable, agreeable corps, and my friend Denny tempted me farther by his account of their present quarters, and the very great attentions and excellent acquaintance Meryton had procured him. Society, I own, is necessary to me. I have been a disappointed man, and my spirits will not bear solitude. I must have employment and society. A military life is not what I intended for, but circumstances have now made it eligible. The church ought to have been my profession. I was brought up for the church, and I should at this time have been in possession of a most valuable living, had it pleased the gentleman we were speaking of just now. Oh, so Mr. Darcy's father, and that he didn't get to go into the church because of Mr. Darcy's father? That's interesting. Give me a second. Yeah, so he's saying he doesn't like to be alone. So I guess society just means, like, the company of other people in this case. Indeed. Yes. The late Mr. Darcy bequeathed me the next presentation of the best living in his gift. Don't know what that means. He was my godfather, and excessively attached to me. I cannot do justice to his kindness. He meant to provide for me amply, and thought he had done it, but when the living fell, it was given elsewhere. So it seems like maybe it's a similar situation to theirs with Collins, that he meant to bequeath spooky shadow. He meant to bequeath the I don't know, a new job, and then when he died, it didn't actually work that way. Good heavens, cried Elizabeth, but how could that be? How could his will be disregarded? Why did you not seek legal redress? There was just such an informality in the terms of the bequest as to give me no hope from law. A man of honor could not have doubted the intention, but Mr. Darcy chose to doubt it. Oh, that's quite the burn. A man of honor wouldn't have doubted, but Mr. Darcy did. Mr. Darcy chose to doubt it, or to treat it as a merely conditional recommendation, and to assert that I had forfeited all claim to it by extravagance, imprudence, in short, anything or nothing. Certain it is that the living became vacant 2 years ago, exactly as I was of an age to hold it, and that it was given to another man. No less certain is it that I cannot accuse myself of having really done anything to deserve to lose it. I have a warm, unguarded temper, and I may perhaps have sometimes spoken my opinion of him, and to him too freely. I can recall nothing worse. But the fact is that we are very different sort of men, and that he hates me. I love that ending. It's like, oh yes, here's all the proper, do. Also, he hates me. I don't want to speak too badly of him. Yeah, he hates me. So I guess he's just saying, like, I told him that I don't like him, and he took it out on me, I guess. Though, unfortunately, I feel like Mr. Darcy should kind of be used to that by now, considering how hateable he is. I feel like he should recognize that he is not agreeable upon first glance. Alright. This is quite shocking. He deserves to be publicly disgraced. Sometime or other he will be, but it shall not be by me. Until I can forget his father, I can never defy or expose him. So is he saying, like, he's not honoring his father, but I will, and so I'm not going to disgrace him. Wickham is seeming like a pretty dang honorable man, I have to say. Alright, yeah, exactly. Elizabeth honored him for such feelings and thought him handsomer than ever as he expressed them. That's pretty much what I just said. But what, said she, after a pause, can have been his motive? What can have induced him to behave so cruelly? A thorough, determined dislike of me. A dislike which I cannot but attribute in some measure to jealousy. Had the late Mr. Darcy liked me less, his son might have borne with me better, but his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him. I believe very early in life. But his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him, I believe, very early in life. He had not a temper to bear the sort of competition in which we stood, the sort of preference which was often given me. Okay, that's making more sense. So, Mr. Darcy's father treated Wickham like his son and ignored his actual son, or maybe not so strong as ignored, like I guess we'll find out, but he treated this kid better than his son, favored him. I had not thought Mr. Darcy so bad as this, though I have never liked him. I had not thought so very ill of him. I had supposed him to be despising his fellow creatures in general, but did not suspect him of descending into such malicious revenge, such injustice, such inhumanity as this. I mean, the man was jealous because his dad wasn't. I mean, we don't have the whole story, because there's degrees, because it could be that his dad was super loving towards Mr. Darcy, who's just ever so slightly more loving to Wickham. And in that case, it's like, okay, yeah. But if it's like, no, like he treated Mr. Darcy like really badly and doted on Mr. Wickham, it's like, yeah, in that case, I'm not gonna say like such injustice, such inhumanity. We need more info. After a few minutes' recollection, however, she continued, I do remember his boasting one day at Netherfield of the implacability of his resentments, of his having an unforgiving temper. His disposition must be dreadful. That's right, he did say that. He did say that he has a grudge, so he doesn't let go. Oops, put this on there again. It's so funny that just the little weight of the bookmark is enough. I do not trust myself on the subject, replied Wickham. I can hardly be just to him. Elizabeth was again deep in thought, and after a time exclaimed, to treat in such a manner the godson, the friend, the favourite of his father. That last one's the important bit, Elizabeth. He's supposed to be the favourite of his father. She could have added, a young man, too, like you, whose very countenance may vouch for your being amiable. But she contented herself with, and one, too, who had probably been his own companion from childhood, connected together, as I think you said, in the closest manner. We were born in the same parish, within the same park. The greatest part of our youth was passed together. Inmates of the same house, sharing the same amusements, objects of the same parental care. My father began life in the profession which your uncle, Mr. Phillips, appears to do so much credit to. So is it being a drunkard? Is that what it is? But he gave up everything to be of use to the late Mr. Darcy, and devoted all his time to the care of the Pemberley property. He was most highly esteemed by Mr. Darcy, a most intimate, confidential friend. Mr. Darcy often acknowledged himself to be under the greatest obligations to my father's active superintendence, and when immediately before my father's death, Mr. Darcy gave him a voluntary promise of providing for me. I am convinced that he felt it to be as much a debt of gratitude to him as of affection to myself. Are we talking about Mr. Darcy or the late Mr. Darcy? I need to reread that. Yeah, I can't. I'm so confused by that because I can't tell who we're talking about. How strange, cried Elizabeth. How abominable. I wonder that the very pride of this Mr. Darcy had not made him just to you. if from no better motive, that he should not have been too proud to be dishonest. For dishonesty, I must call it. Yeah, I'm lost for what we're talking about. It is wonderful, replied Wickham, for almost all his actions may be traced to pride. Okay, we are talking about our Mr. Darcy. And pride has often been his best friend. It has connected him nearer with virtue than any other feeling. We are none of us consistent, and in his behavior to me, there were stronger impulses even than pride. It's interesting that he says it connected him to virtue, that, like, it almost helps him be a better person? That's strange. Can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good? Okay, so I guess she is asking the question I'm asking. Yes, it has often led him to be liberal and generous, to give his money freely, to display hospitality, and to assist his tenants and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride, for he is very proud of what his father was, have done this. Okay, family pride and filial pride, for he is very proud of what his father was, have done this. Ooh, okay. Not to appear to disgrace his family, to degenerate from the proper qualities, or lose the influence of the Pemberley house, is a powerful motive. He has also brotherly pride, which, with some brotherly affection, makes him a very kind and careful guardian of his sister, and you will hear him generally cried up as the most attentive and best of brothers. Interesting. What sort of girl is Miss Darcy? He shook his head. I wish I could call her amiable. It gives me pain to speak ill of a Darcy. You were just speaking ill of a Darcy. But she is too much like her brother. Very, very proud. As a child, she was affectionate and pleasing, extremely fond of me, and I have devoted hours and hours to her amusement, but she is nothing to me now. She is a handsome girl, about 15 or 16, and I understand highly accomplished. Since her father's death, her home has been London, where a lady lives with her and superintends her education. Interesting. Quite the strong statement to be like, oh yeah, like she was great, like we got along, and she's nothing to me now. It's like, what happened there? Unless it just means like, oh, we just don't interact, and so like we're nothing to each other now. It is interesting that he thinks that the sister ain't so great as well. That kind of is leaning on the maybe the dad wasn't so great situation, that maybe he was not so great to both of them. After many pauses and many trials of other subjects, Elizabeth could not help reverting once more to the first, and saying, I'm astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. How can Mr. Bingley, who seems good humour itself, and is, I really believe, truly amiable, be in friendship with such a man? How can they suit each other? Do you know Mr. Bingley? Do you know Mr. Bingley? Not at all. He's a sweet-tempered, amiable, charming man. He cannot know what Mr. Darcy is. Probably not, but Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses. He does not want abilities. He can be a conversable companion, if he thinks it worth his while, among those who are at all his equals in consequence. He is a very different man from what he is to the less prosperous. His pride never deserts him, but with the rich he is liberal-minded, just, sincere, rational, honourable, and perhaps agreeable, allowing something for fortune and figure. Death's Head has to go later, Death's Head, but it was great to have you. Mako says, I feel like that's I haven't seen her for years, though, sort of statement. Yeah, that makes sense for the she's nothing to me. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, so as I think most of you will know, that I have been reading Moriarty the Patriot, which is all about nobles, nobles sucking around this time. I think it's later than this. So that part though makes me go, that's not so great. I don't like that. I don't like it if he's, only being nice to the other rich folks. That ain't so great. All right. That is the first thing, and it almost assuredly is influenced by the other things I'm reading. But that is the first genuinely unlikable thing that I have seen about Mr. Darcy so far. Like, maybe not the first, but like one of the only things, because most of the things just seem like he's introverted and he's not really good with people, but he's actually an okay dude inside. He just doesn't present well. That's the first clue that there is some badness on the inside, perhaps. All right. The whist party soon afterwards breaking up, the players gathered around the other table, and Mr. Collins took his station between his cousin Elizabeth and Mrs. Phillips. The usual inquiries as to his success were made by the latter. It had not been very great. He had lost every point, but when Mrs. Phillips began to express her concern thereupon, he assured her with much earnest gravity that it was not of the least importance, that he considered the money as a mere trifle, and begged she would not make herself uneasy. Okay, I see. I'm confused because he was playing with Mrs. Phillips, wasn't he? I thought they were the first two to sit down and play. Mako said goodnight and Dad said, "Oh, I'm gonna watch TV with the family, not sleep." That is fair and a mood. I feel like I do that a lot where I'm like, all right, gotta go. It's like, good night. Oh, no, I'm not going to bed. All right. Oh yeah, I was gonna check and see if I could, Yeah, it says, Mr. Collins seemed likely to sink into insignificance. To the young ladies, he certainly was nothing, but he'd had still, at intervals, a kind listener in Mrs. Phillips, and was, by her watchfulness, most abundantly supplied with coffee and muffin. When the card tables were placed, he had an opportunity of obliging her in return by sitting down to whist. The obliging her sounds like he's playing whist with her, but now it sounds like he wasn't. So, I don't know the situation here. But the sentence of, am I in the right place? Yes, I am. Took up his station between his cousin Elizabeth, makes it seem like he gets up from the card table, goes up to Elizabeth, and just, sandwiches himself, I'd say between her and Wickham, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I can't tell if Mrs. Phillips is just being nice or if she actually thinks highly of him or at least thinks neutrally of him. "I know very well, madam," said he, "that when persons sit down to a card table they must take their chance of these things, and happily I am not in such circumstances as to make 5 shillings any object. There are undoubtedly many who could not say the same, but thanks to Lady Catherine de Boroughh, I am removed far beyond the necessity of regarding little matters." Is that one of his humble brags? Mr. Wickham's attention was caught, and after observing Mr. Collins for only a few moments, he asked Elizabeth in a low voice whether her relation were very intimately acquainted with the family of de Boroughh. "Lady Catherine de Boroughh," she replied, "has very lately given him a living. I hardly know how Mr. Collins was first introduced to her notice, but he certainly has not known her long. You know, of course, that Lady Catherine de Boroughh and Lady Anne Darcy were sisters, consequently that she is aunt to the present Mr. Darcy." Hoo-hoo! Development! Interesting. So, is Lady Anne Darcy the aunt to Mr. Darcy, or is Lady Catherine de Boroughh the aunt to Mr. Darcy? No, indeed, I did not. I knew nothing at all of Lady Catherine's connections. I never heard of her existence till the day before yesterday. Her daughter, Miss de Boroughh, will have a very large fortune, and it is believed that she and her cousin will unite the two estates. Who's her cousin? Oh, Mr. Darcy? That she wants to marry Mr. Darcy? Oh, extra developments. This information made Elizabeth smile as she thought of poor Miss Bingley. Oh, okay. Vain indeed must be all her attentions. Vain and useless her affection. Oh, okay. Vain indeed must be all her attentions. Vain and useless her affection for his sister and her praise of himself. If he were already self-destined to another. Okay, interesting. So that's almost assuredly gonna be a source of conflict when Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth are becoming a thing. Mr. Collins, said she, speaks highly both of Lady Catherine and her daughter, but from some particulars that he has related of her ladyship, I suspect his gratitude misleads him, and that in spite of her being his patroness, she is an arrogant, conceited woman. Interesting. Okay, this is the first negative thing that we have heard about Lady Catherine. Curious. I believe her to be both in a great degree, replied Wickham. I have not seen her for many years, but I very well remember that I never liked her, and that her manners were dictatorial and insolent. She has the reputation of being remarkably sensible and clever, but I rather believe she derives part of her abilities from her rank and fortune, part from her authoritative manner, and the rest from the pride of her nephew, who chooses that everyone connected with him should have an understanding of the first class. I can't remember, is Mr. Collins her nephew? Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Elizabeth allowed that he had given a very rational account of it, and they continued talking together, with mutual satisfaction, till supper put an end to cards, and gave the rest of the ladies their share of Mr. Wickham's attentions. There could be no conversation in the noise of Mrs. Phillips's supper party, but his manners recommended him to everybody. Whatever he said well. Whatever he did, done gracefully. Elizabeth went away with her head full of him. I like that. Her head full of him. She could think of nothing but of Mr. Wickham, and of what he had told her all the way home, and there was not time for her even to mention his name as they went, for neither Lydia nor Mr. Collins were once silent. Lydia talked incessantly of lottery tickets, of the fish she had lost and the fish she had won, and Mr. Collins in describing the civility of Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, protesting that he did not in the least regard his losses at whist, enumerating all the dishes at supper, and repeatedly fearing that he crowded his cousins, had more to say than he could well manage before the carriage stopped at Longbourn House. The Lydia stuff is so funny that... I still think that's so funny that she's been talking nothing but the officers, and then the minute gambling came up, she's like, oh yeah, and then this play happened, and this play happened. And it also seems like Mr. Collins, like, Lydia's over here being like, oh yeah, and this happened, and then Mr. Collins is like, I don't care about the money, I'm really fine. And we're like, nobody asked, but okay. And it makes it seem like he really does care about the money. Give me a second. Let's see how long the next chapter is. Oh, it's very short. Okay. No problem then. Can I do this? No, I don't think it'll be enough on that side. Alright, chapter 17. Elizabeth related to Jane the next day what had passed between Mr. Wickham and herself. Jane listened with astonishment and concern. She knew not how to believe that Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard, and yet it was not in her nature to question the veracity of a young man of such amiable appearance as Wickham. The possibility of his having really endured such unkindness was enough to interest all her tender feelings, and nothing therefore remained to be done but to think well of them both, to defend the conduct of each, and throw into the account of accident or mistake whatever could not be otherwise explained. Hang on a second. So she is just saying she kind of immediately sympathizes with him because of what she's heard. It does seem like the story definitely has, I don't know if, I mean, Prejudice is a little different to me than this, but this is included in Prejudice, that it has this theme of judging a book by its cover and judging things by their appearance. And that can be a form of prejudice, but I do think of prejudice as something bigger than that. But they do seem to be like, oh yeah, I met Mr. Darcy once, he kind of seemed like he sucked, so he sucks. And then same thing here, it's like, I heard you talking about Mr. Wickham being a cool guy for, like, one time, and that's enough for me, you know? They have both, said she. I don't know if this is Jane or Elizabeth. I have been deceived, I dare say, in some way or other, of which we can form no idea. Interested people have perhaps misrepresented each to the other. It is, in short, impossible for us to conjecture the causes or circumstances which may have alienated them, without actual blame on either side. Okay, it was Jane. Very true indeed. And now, my dear Jane, what have you got to say in behalf of the interested people who have probably been concerned in the business? Do clear them, too, or we shall be obliged to think ill of somebody. Do clear them, too? What? Laugh as much as you choose, but you will not laugh me out of my opinion, my dearest Lizzie. Do but consider in what a disgraceful light it places Mr. Darcy to be treating his father's favourite in such a manner, one whom his father had promised to provide for. It is impossible. No man of common humanity, no man who had any value for his character, could be capable of it. Can his most intimate friends be so excessively deceived in him? Oh, no. I think I misunderstood that. Oh, interesting. Okay, so I think she's saying, like, maybe she actually is defending Darcy. Maybe it's the opposite of what I thought, that instead of her... Let me go back. Oh, okay, I see. So it says, the possibility of him really endured such unkindness was enough to interest all her tender feelings, and nothing therefore remained to be done but to think well of them both, to defend their conduct of each, and throw into the account of accident or mistake whatever could not be otherwise explained. Okay, so she's saying, I trust Mr. Bingley's opinion very highly, and he likes Mr. Darcy, so I can't believe that he's really as horrible as Wickham is saying. But your story of Mr. Wickham does incite my sympathy, so I can't really speak ill of either of them, so I'm going to defend both of them. Okay, so it is the opposite of what I thought. That's better. I like that much better. Yeah, and so... and then let me read this again. Yeah, okay, so then she's saying, like, if he really is as prideful as he said that he was, and he cares about his reputation, he wouldn't treat Wickham like this. So there has to be an actual reason besides just jealousy for him to treat him like this, which is really interesting. It's more of what I was saying. That means, like, clear their name, otherwise they'll be forced to believe the bad things they were told. Oh, right, so that was at the bottom of the page. Okay, so yeah, Lizzie was saying, clear their name. Okay, I got you now. Yeah, I misunderstood what was going on there. I can much more easily believe Mr. Bingley's being imposed on than that Mr. Wickham should invent such a history of himself as he gave me last night. Names, facts, everything mentioned without ceremony. If it be not so, let Mr. Darcy contradict it. Besides, there was truth in his looks. Ask Mr. Darcy, talk to him. But what was I gonna say? So my thoughts right now is I think that Mr. Wickham believes what he's saying. I don't think he's lying. I mean, it's possible he is, but I don't think he is. I just think that we don't have the full story. Like I said, like, we don't know how Mr. Darcy's dad treated him. And so that, I think, is going to be part of the key thing here, that there are degrees, and if he was, like, full-on abused or something like that, especially if, like, both him and his sister were, then, like, that makes more sense, so that he's like, I do not want to follow out his will, you know, kind of thing. But we'll see. It is difficult indeed. It is distressing. One does not know what to think. I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think. There's the prejudice right there. But Jane could think with certainty on only one point, that Mr. Bingley, if he had been imposed on, would have much to suffer when the affair became public. So, like, if it comes out that they're not actually friends, that'll make him look bad, I guess. The two young ladies were summoned from the shrubbery. The shrubbery! Bring us a shrubbery! Where this conversation passed. Now I'm just imagining them sitting in a bush. Instead of them, like, having tea outside, they're just like, what'd you think of Mr. Wickham in the bushes? By the arrival of some of the very persons of whom they've been speaking! This is extra funny, so they're just like, what do you think of Mr. Wickham, Mr. Bingley? And then Mr. Bingley walks up, he's like, hey, what you talking about out here in the shrubbery, ladies? The arrival of some of the very persons of whom they had been speaking. Mr. Bingley and his sisters came to give their personal invitation for the long-expected ball at Netherfield, which was fixed for the following Tuesday. The two ladies were delighted to see their dear friend again, and called it an age since they had met, and repeatedly asked what she had been doing with herself since their separation. To the rest of the family they paid little attention, avoiding Mrs. Bennet as much as possible, saying not much to Elizabeth, and nothing at all to the others. They were soon gone again, rising from their seats with an activity which took their brother by surprise, and hurrying off as if eager to escape from Mrs. Bennet's civilities. Hang on a sec. But they don't actually like Jane, right? They really don't like Elizabeth, but they also don't like Jane. So I guess this is just keeping up appearances, and being like, oh, it's been so long since we've seen each other. I hate you. You know, I think. He's standing right behind me, isn't he? Yes, exactly. Yeah, it totally reads as like they're just chatting about like, oh yeah, what do you think of Mr. Bingley? What do you think of Mr. Wickham? And then Mr. Bingley walks out behind them, and they're like, oh hey dude, how you doing? And he's like, I'm doing great. Come to my ball, you know. This is so I think I've talked about this before, that this is. So far, probably the biggest drawback overall with this novel to me is that they really, or she really doesn't give us any info on the settings, so that it is mostly just dialogue, and so we don't know where people are, and we sometimes don't know how many people are in the room or who is talking, which can be a hindrance. Now, I think I said this before, I would much prefer this to 10 pages of setting. Like, my brain can provide the setting for me. It becomes an issue when it provides it wrong, when I get new information and I realize I've been imagining it wrong. So it's not the most grievous of sins to me. It would be, for me personally as a reader, I would have more issue with the 10 pages of setting than this. But this is one of the biggest issues I see with the writing so far, and this shrubbery situation is a great example of it, because here she gave us some setting, but she didn't tell us, like, oh, they're talking at a table and there's, you know, a hedge behind them, or like, here they are walking by the house and walking by the shrubbery. No, it's just like, what's the exact phrasing? Like, the two ladies were summoned from the shrubbery where this conversation passed. And it's like, the shrubbery where this conversation passed? Like, that seems like y'all are hiding in the bushes, you know? I don't know if that would be a more natural phrasing back then. It might have been, but to my ear, not being given any other setting but the shrubbery where this conversation passed makes it seem like they are talking inside of a shrubbery. Okay. The prospect of the Netherfield Ball was extremely agreeable to every female of the family. Mrs. Bennet chose to consider it as given in compliment to her eldest daughter, and was particularly flattered by receiving the invitation from Mr. Bingley himself, instead of a ceremonious card. Jane pictured to herself a happy evening in the society of her two friends, and the attentions of their brother. And Elizabeth thought with pleasure of dancing a great deal with Mr. Wickham, and of seeing a confirmation of everything in Mr. Darcy's looks and behaviour. The happiness anticipated by Catherine and Lydia depended less on any single event or any particular person, for though they each, like Elizabeth, meant to dance half the evening with Mr. Wickham, he was by no means the only partner who could satisfy them, and a ball was at any rate a ball, and even Mary could assure her family that she had no disinclination for it. No disinclination. I love that. It's like, I'm not disinclined to go. That actually makes total sense. What makes total sense? What are you referring to there? Oh, I think there was an ad for part of that. Sorry if anybody missed that. But yeah, now I'm so curious. What makes sense? Yeah, I don't like every female in the family, but I'm certain that sounded normal back then. Oh, okay, I see over here in the Discord chat. Shrubbery, shrub border, shrub garden is part of a garden where shrubs, mostly flowering species, are thickly planted. The original shrubberies were mostly sections of large gardens with one or more paths winding through it. A less remembered aspect of the English landscape garden, with very few original 18th century examples surviving. Oh, so it's kind of like a maze, kind of like the garden maze sort of situation, where they're just kind of hanging out in the garden. That does make more sense, for sure. I'm definitely imagining shrubbery as like a little bush. And I mean, they are, you know, like bushes and hedges and stuff, but it makes more sense in the context of like, oh, we're hanging out in the labyrinth, basically. Reminds me of in the first Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland movie, I think that the twins are at the beginning are like talking in that sort of area. What was I gonna say? So it's interesting because I thought that Lydia and Catherine had their eyes on specific officers, but I guess not. I guess they just are like, oh yeah, there's lots of officers we want to dance with. And I'm very curious of what info we're gonna get from Darcy. Well, I can have my mornings to myself, said she, Mary, I assume. It is enough. I think it no sacrifice to join occasionally in evening engagements. Society has claims on us all, and I profess myself one of those who consider intervals of recreation and amusement as desirable for everybody. She really is the smart kid, you know, just the like, oh, it's not disagreeable, you know, it's fine. Like I have my mornings, and I know I must engage in society later, you know. Elizabeth's spirits were so high on the occasion that, though she did not often speak unnecessarily to Mr. Collins, she could not help asking him whether he intended to accept Mr. Bingley's invitation. If he did, whether he would think it proper to join in the evening's amusement. She was rather surprised I think I missed something. What? What did I do? Oh no, it's the... Oh my goodness, I can't believe I had such a brain fart. She's surprised to find that he entertained no scruple, whatever, on that head, and was very far from dreading a rebuke either from the Archbishop or Lady Catherine de Bourgh by venturing to dance. Wait, so is it saying that... Is it saying he will get rebuked or he won't? Is it saying, like, I can't go because they're gonna reprimand me because I'm a man of the cloth, you know? Or if it's like, oh yeah, they'll love it. So, like, I do not have to suffer their rebukes. I'm not sure. Because very far from dreading is the part that has me confused. Does that mean we're not dreading? Or it's like, we are close, you know? I mean, yeah, it doesn't say not. It doesn't say not very far. It does say very far. So I guess that means he is dreading our rebuke. Or, he isn't. I'm confusing myself and trying to explain it. We'll figure it out, I guess. I am by no means of opinion, I assure you, said he, that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, to respectable people, can have any evil tendency. A lot of negatives again. So he's saying it's not going to be evil, it's going to be fine, I think. And I am so far from objecting to dancing myself, and I shall hope to be honored with the hands of all my fair cousins in the course of the evening. Okay. And I take this opportunity of soliciting yours, Miss Elizabeth, for the first 2 dances especially, a preference which I trust my cousin Jane will attribute to the right cause, and not be any disrespect for her. Yeah, so I think that Elizabeth was not expecting that, I think, because it says she was surprised. Let's check that out a little bit. Yeah, so she was surprised that he's going to be joining, so I'm guessing she's not thrilled by this prospect, but we'll see. Elizabeth felt herself completely taken in. She had fully proposed being engaged by Wickham for those very dances, that's what I was thinking. And have Mr. Collins instead, yeah, not a great replacement. Her liveliness had been never worse timed. There was no help for it, however. Mr. Wickham's happiness and her own was perforce delayed a little longer, and Mr. Collins's proposal accepted with as good a grace as she could. She was not the better pleased with his gallantry from the idea it suggested of something more. It now first struck her that she was selected from among her sisters as worthy of being the mistress of Hunsford Parsonage, and of assisting to form a quadrille table at Rosings, in the absence of the more eligible visitors. The idea soon reached to conviction, and she observed his increasing civilities towards herself, and heard his frequent attempt at a compliment on her wit and vivacity. And though more astonished than gratified herself by this effect of her charms, it was not long before her mother gave her to understand that the probability of their marriage was exceedingly agreeable to her. Elizabeth, however, did not choose to take the hint, being well aware that a serious dispute must be the consequence of any reply. Mr. Collins might never make the offer, and till he did, it was useless to quarrel about him. If there had not been a Netherfield Ball to prepare for and talk of, the younger Miss Bennets would have been in a pitiable state at this time, for from the day of the invitation to the day of the ball, there was such a succession of rain as prevented their walking to Meryton once. No aunts, no officers, no news could be sought after. The very shoe roses for Netherfield were got by proxy. Even Elizabeth might have found some trial of her patience in weather, which totally suspended the improvement of her acquaintance with Mr. Wickham, and nothing less than a dance on Tuesday could have made such a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday endurable to Kitty and Lydia. Okay, so I decided I just wanted to get to the end of the chapter and then talk afterwards, but so she knows now. She like realized, she was like, oh, he's after me, and then she thinks back to all their interactions and she's like, crap, he's into me. And then her mom is like, yeah, he is. I'm cool with it. And Elizabeth's like, great. And she's like, oh, he might never make the offer. I think he's gonna make the offer. Like this, I don't know that putting it off until he makes the offer is a great move in this situation, Lizzie. But I am very interested in the ball. Let's see. I assume it's gonna be longer. Yep, definitely longer. I think this will probably be the last chapter I'll read tonight. All right. What do I predict for this? Because we got 3 dudes who are gonna want to dance with her. We got Collins, Wickham, and Darcy. So which ones are actually gonna get to dance with her? I think that Collins is, because she did say yes. So I think he is gonna get to dance with her. But the question is, if she's ever going to get to dance with Mr. Wickham, if she's going to dance with Mr. Darcy, or if she's going to dance with neither of them. And is she going to find out about Darcy's dad? If she's going to find out any information. And she's going to be over in the corner being like, what say you, Mr. Darcy? And he's like, my dad sucked. You know? We shall see. Chapter 18. Till Elizabeth entered the drawing room at Netherfield and looked in vain for Mr. Wickham among the cluster of redcoats there assembled, a doubt of his being present had never occurred to her. The certainty of meeting him had not been checked by any of those recollections that might not unreasonably have alarmed her. She had dressed with more than usual care, and prepared in the highest spirits for the conquest of all that remained unsubdued of his heart, trusting that it was not more than might be won in the course of the evening. But in an instant arose the dreadful suspicion of his being purposely omitted for Mr. Darcy's pleasure in the Bingleys' invitation to the officers, and though this was not exactly the case, the absolute fact of his absence was pronounced by his friend Mr. Denny, to whom Lydia eagerly applied, and who told them that Wickham had been obliged to go to town on business the day before, and was not yet returned, adding with a significant smile, I do not imagine his business would have called him away just now if he had not wished to avoid a certain gentleman here. That's great. I love that. It's like, yeah, like he has business. Oh, okay. I don't think that he would have that business if it weren't for Mr. Darcy. Love the honesty. This part of his intelligence, though, unheard by Lydia, was caught by Elizabeth, and as it assured her that Darcy was not less answerable for Wickham's absence than if her first surmise had been just, every feeling of displeasure against the former was so sharpened by immediate disappointment that she could hardly reply with tolerable civility to the polite inquiries which he directly afterwards approached to make. Attention, forbearance, patience with Darcy was injury to Wickham. She was resolved against any sort of conversation with him, and turned away with a degree of ill humor, which she could not wholly surmount, even in speaking to Mr. Bingley, whose blind partiality provoked her. Oh my goodness. So she's like, I had one goal for this night. That was the dance with Mr. Wickham. It's Mr. Darcy's fault he's not here. If I'm nice to Mr. Darcy, that is an insult to Mr. Wickham. I won't talk to him all night. I won't even talk to Mr. Bingley, because Mr. Bingley is implicitly responsible for him not being here, because he's friends with Mr. Darcy. Oh, my goodness. But Elizabeth was not formed for ill humor, and though every prospect of her own was destroyed for the evening, it could not dwell long on her spirits, and having told all her griefs to Charlotte Lucas, whom she had not seen for a week, she was soon able to make a voluntary transition to the oddities of her cousin, and to point him out to her particular notice. So I guess, okay, I'll just keep going. The 2 first dances, however, brought a return of distress. They were dances of mortification. I believe that. Mr. Collins, awkward and solemn, apologizing instead of attending, and often moving wrong without being aware of it, gave her all the shame and misery which a disagreeable partner for a couple of dances can give. The moment of her release from him was ecstasy. She danced next with an officer, and had the refreshment of talking of Wickham, and of hearing that he was universally liked. When those dances were over, she returned to Charlotte Lucas, and was in conversation with her, when she found herself suddenly addressed by Mr. Darcy, who took her so much by surprise in his application for her hand, that, without knowing what she did, she accepted him. You ever been so shocked you just said yes to something you really didn't want to do? I love that. And that she's like, no, I'm not going to talk to him. I'm not going to look at him. Any niceness to him is being rude to Wickham. Hey, Elizabeth, want to dance with me? Yes. That is glorious. Oh my goodness. He walked away again. Immediately, as she was left to fret over her own want of presence of mind. Charlotte tried to console her. Wait, she just asked to dance. Why did you walk away? Right? Maybe he's saying dance later? I don't know. I can't get over how awesome that is. I'm trying to think of like a comparison of what that would be like. Of just like I don't want a roast beef sandwich. Like roast beef is the worst. Like saying anything nice about roast beef is an insult to turkey. Hey, you want a roast beef sandwich? Yes. Oh, all right. Anyways, I dare say you'll find him very agreeable. I don't remember the voice it gave Charlotte. Heaven forbid! That would be the greatest misfortune of all, to find a man agreeable whom one is determined to hate. Do not wish me such an evil. Oh, oh, Elizabeth. I love that. This is awesome. When the dancing recommenced, however, and okay, so it was like a break time, and he's like, hey, can I dance with you next dance? Yes. Cool, bye. And the dancing recommenced, however, and Darcy approached to claim her hand. Charlotte cannot help cautioning her in a whisper not to be a simpleton and allow her fancy for Wickham to make her appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man of 10 times his consequence. So Charlotte's like, I get that you hate him, I get that you love Wickham, but he's rich, so be nice. Elizabeth made no answer and took her place in the set, amazed at the dignity to which she was arrived in being allowed to stand opposite to Mr. Darcy, and reading in her neighbors' looks their equal amazement in beholding it. So nobody expected this. That's awesome. They stood for some time without speaking a word, and she began to imagine that their silence was to last through 2 dances, and at first was resolved not to break it, till suddenly fancying that it would be the greater punishment to her partner to oblige him to talk, she made some slight observation on the dance. He replied and was silent again. After a pause of some minutes, she addressed him a second time with, It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark about the size of the room or the number of couples. Man, I don't know how weird that is for back then, but that would be so weird now that you're just like, oh, hey, like, nice weather we having. Mm-hmm, yeah, nice. And then more silence. All right, it's your turn to talk. It's like, are there rules about this? But I guess that's just her trying to annoy him in a way. He smiled and assured her that whatever she wished him to say should be said. Is that Darcy or her? Hang on. Okay, it is her, I think. Very well. That reply will do for the present. Perhaps by the by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones. But now we may be silent. Was that her? I can't tell. Okay, so this is Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, Darcy, Elizabeth. Okay, it is Darcy. Very well. That reply will do for the present. Perhaps by the by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones. But now we may remain silent. Reminds me of that when you injure your back carrying the conversation skit. I don't know if I've seen that yet. I think I saw it get posted in one of the meme channels. Do you talk by rule then while you are dancing? Oh, nope. I think I did get it wrong. I think I missed one. Okay, so this is Elizabeth, so that's Darcy. So this is Elizabeth, so that's Darcy. So this is Elizabeth. Okay. Let's try this again. See, this is what I was talking about. I can't always tell who's talking. I guess I wasn't talking about it as much before, but that is the more grievous sin. Not having the setting, like I said, I can deal with that. Not knowing who's talking, that's much more grievous. Alright, let's try again. Hope I get it right this time. Alright. Very well, that reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are more pleasanter than public ones. But now we may be silent. And do you talk by rule then while you are dancing? Sometimes. Oh, one must speak a little, you know. It would look odd to be entirely silent for half an hour together, and yet for the advantage of some, conversation ought to be so arranged that they may have the trouble of saying as little as possible. What does that mean? They may have the trouble of saying as little as possible. Are you consulting your own feelings in the present case, or do you imagine that you're gratifying mine? So, let's see. So, I guess he's asking, like, is that, what you think or what you think I think, I guess, or maybe he's kind of on to her that, she's trying to play 3D chess with him a little bit, I guess. Both, replied Elizabeth archly, for I have always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. Interesting. We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity for all in the eclat of a proverb. That's amazing. I'm not gonna talk unless what I say will be passed down through generations as a proverb. That's amazing. That is interesting that she is, like, that seems really nice. That doesn't seem, like she's trying to annoy him with that. Like, that seems A, true, and B, like, something that further makes the relationship go forward, not, put up a wall. So that's interesting that she's noticed that. This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I'm sure, said he. How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it a faithful portrait, undoubtedly. I must not decide on my own performance. So he's saying that he doesn't necessarily agree with that? That's interesting. He made no answer, and they were again silent till they had gone down the dance. When he asked her, she and her sisters did not very often walk to Meryton. She answered in the affirmative, and, unable to resist the temptation, added, When you met us there the other day, we had just been forming a new acquaintance. We're gonna talk about Wickham. I wonder if he's gathering intel. He's like, okay, do you guys, go to Meryton often? And she's like, yeah, we do. It's like, okay, goes to Meryton often. Maybe I should go to Meryton often. The effect was immediate. A deeper shade of hauteur overspread his features, but he said not a word, and Elizabeth, though blaming herself for her own weakness, could not go on. At length Darcy spoke, and in a constrained manner said, Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure his making friends. Whether he may be equally capable of retaining them is less certain. Interesting. So he is kind of saying, okay, he looks great when you first meet him, but maybe not so much when you get to know him. And I think Mr. Darcy is the opposite, that he doesn't make a good first impression, but after you know him, then you'll probably be friends forever. He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship. Nice, replied Elizabeth with emphasis, and in a manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life. Darcy made no answer, and seemed desirous of changing the subject. At that moment, Sir William Lucas appeared close to them, meaning to pass through the set to the other side of the room. But on perceiving Mr. Darcy, he stopped with a bow of superior courtesy to compliment him on his dancing and his partner. Wait, so he just walks up in the middle of a dance and talks to them? That seems rude. I've been most highly gratified indeed, my dear sir. It's such very... is that... Oh, no, maybe that is Darcy. No? No, I think it's Lucas. I've been most highly gratified indeed, my dear sir. Such very superior dancing is not often seen. It is evident that you belong to the first circles. Allow me to say, however, that your fair partner does not disgrace you, and that I must hope to have this pleasure often repeated, especially when a certain desirable event, my dear Miss Eliza, glancing at her sister in Bingley, shall take place. That is odd to put in dialogue, glancing at her sister in Bingley. I don't know if that's saying he does that or he says that. Shall take place. What congratulations will then flow in? I appeal to Mr. Darcy, but let me not interrupt you, sir. You will not thank me for detaining you from the bewitching converse of the young lady, whose bright eyes are also upbraiding me. So is that organic, or did Miss Bingley tell him about the bright eyes thing? The latter part of this address was scarcely heard by Darcy, but Sir William's allusion to his friend seemed to strike him forcibly, and his eyes were directed with a very serious expression towards Bingley and Jane, who were dancing together. Recovering himself, however, shortly, he turned to his partner and said, Sir William's interruption has made me forget what we were talking of. I do not think we were speaking at all. Sir William could not have interrupted any two people in the room who had less to say for themselves. We have tried 2 or 3 subjects already, without success, and what we are to talk of next I cannot imagine. What think you of books? Nice. He picks something he knows she likes, because they were talking about it before. Books? Oh, no. I'm sure we never read the same, or not with the same feelings. Oh, no, we don't read the same books, and if we do read the same books, we don't have the same feelings about them. Ah, nice. I am sorry you think so, but if that be the case, there can at least be no want of subject. We may compare our different opinions. Also nice. No, I cannot talk of books in the ballroom. My head is always full of something else. Sure about that. The present always occupies you in such scenes, does it? Said he, with a look of doubt. Yes, always, she replied, without knowing what she said, for her thoughts had wandered far from the subject. Far from the present. As soon afterwards appeared by her suddenly exclaiming, I remember hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave, that your resentment once created was unappeasable. Oh, I see. I remember hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave, that your resentment, once created, was unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to it being created. Okay, so that sentence makes me feel more confident about my comma choices, because it should be, I remember hearing you once say, comma, Mr. Darcy, comma, that you hardly ever forgave, comma, that your resentment, comma, once created, comma, was unappeasable. So it seems like a lot of commas, but I would have read that better if they had been there. I am, said he with a firm voice. And never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice. Oh, the word prejudice came up, perhaps for the first time in the book. I don't remember. I hope not. It is particularly incumbent on those who never change their opinion to be secure of judging properly at first. True. May I ask to what these questions tend? Merely to the illustration of your character, said she, endeavoring to shake off her gravity. I am trying to make it out. And what is your success? And she shook her head. I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as puzzle me exceedingly. I don't feel like you have. I feel like you've mostly heard hate for him, except for from Mr. Bingley. I can readily believe, answered he gravely, that report may vary greatly with respect to me, and I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you were not to sketch my character at the present moment, as there is reason to fear that the performance would reflect no credit on either. No credit on either of what? Not sure. But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity. I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours, he coldly replied. I don't know what that means, and that sounded like he was saying, like, oh, like, we should hang out more, this shouldn't be the last time that we hang out, but he says it coldly, so I think I misinterpreted that. And she said no more, and they went down the other dance and parted in silence, on each side dissatisfied, though not to an equal degree. For in Darcy's breast there was a tolerable, powerful feeling towards her, which soon procured her pardon, and directed all his anger against another. So he's mad that Wickham said stuff about him, and he's like, I like her! And then you had to go and make it even worse. Maybe it's saying, like, oh, I'm gonna suspend our pleasure, like, let's separate, I guess, maybe? I'm not sure. They not long separated when Miss Bingley came towards her, and with an expression of civil disdain, thus accosted her. So, Miss Eliza, I hear you are quite delighted with George Wickham. Your sister has been talking to me about him, and asking me 1,000 questions. And I find that the young man forgot to tell you, among his other communications, that he was the son of old Wickham, the late Mr. Darcy's steward. Hold on. Okay, so he was the son of the steward. Got you. Let me recommend you, however, as a friend, not to give implicit confidence to all his assertions, for as to Mr. Darcy's using him ill, it is perfectly false, for on the contrary he has been always remarkably kind to him, though George Wickham has treated Mr. Darcy in an infamous manner. I do not know the particulars, but I know very well that Mr. Darcy is not in the least to blame, and he cannot bear to hear George Wickham mentioned, and that though my brother thought he could not well avoid including him in his invitation to the officers, he was excessively glad to find that he had taken himself out of the way. His coming into the country at all is a most insolent thing indeed, and I wonder how he could presume to do it. I pity you, Miss Eliza, for this discovery of your favourite's guilt, but really, considering his descent, one could not expect much better. Hang on a second. You okay, Kitty? Where'd you go? Oh, here you are. Hello, Kitty. So I like oh wow, I pity you, for discovering your favorite's guilt. And it's like, I don't think she trusts you, man. I don't think that she believes anything you say. His guilt and his descent appear by your account to be the same, said Elizabeth angrily, for I have heard you accuse him of nothing worse than of being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward, and of that, I can assure you, he informed me himself. That is true, excuse me, that she did not say what was wrong. I beg your pardon, replied Miss Bingley, turning away with a sneer. Excuse my interference, it was kindly meant. Insolent girl, said Elizabeth to herself. You are much mistaken if you expect to influence me by such a paltry attack as this. I see nothing in it but your own wilful ignorance and the malice of Mr. Darcy. Oh, I thought she was saying that she has malice towards Darcy, but she's saying Darcy's malice. She then sought her eldest sister, who had undertaken to make inquiries of the same subject of Bingley. Jane met her with a smile of such sweet complacency, a glow of such happy expression, as sufficiently marked how well she was satisfied with the occurrences of the evening. Elizabeth instantly read her feelings, and at the moment solicitude for Wickham, resentment against his enemies, and everything else gave way before the hope of Jane's being in the fairest way for happiness. So, Mr. Bingley spoke highly of Wickham? That doesn't make sense. Okay. I want to know, said she, with a countenance no less smiling than her sister's, what you have learned about Mr. Wickham. But perhaps you have been too pleasantly engaged to think of any third person, in which case you may be sure of my pardon. Yes, kitty, sneezy little kitty. No, replied Jane, I have not forgotten him, but I have nothing satisfactory to tell you. Mr. Bingley does not know the whole of his history, and is quite ignorant of the circumstances which have principally offended Mr. Darcy, but he will vouch for the good conduct, the probity and honour of his friend, and is perfectly convinced that Mr. Wickham has deserved much less attention from Mr. Darcy than he has received. Interesting. I am sorry to say that by his account, as well as his sister's, Mr. Wickham is by no means a respectable young man. I'm afraid he has been very imprudent, and has deserved to lose Mr. Darcy's regard. Mr. Bingley does not know Mr. Wickham himself? No, he never saw him till the other morning at Meryton. This account, then, is what he has received from Mr. Darcy. I am perfectly satisfied. But what does he say of the living? He does not exactly recollect the circumstances, though he has heard them from Mr. Darcy more than once. But he believes that it was left to him conditionally only, which is what Wickham said. What Wickham said that Darcy thought. I have not a doubt of Mr. Bingley's sincerity, said Elizabeth warmly, but you must excuse my not being convinced by assurances only. Mr. Bingley's defence of his friend was a very able one, I dare say, but since he is unacquainted with several parts of the story, and has learnt the rest from that friend himself, I shall venture still to think of both gentlemen as I did before. She then changed the discourse to one more gratifying to each, and on which there could be no difference of sentiment. Elizabeth listened with delight to the happy, though modest hopes which Jane entertained of Bingley's regard, and said all in her power to heighten her confidence in it. On their being joined by Mr. Bingley himself, Elizabeth withdrew to Miss Lucas, to whose inquiry after the pleasantness of her last partner she had scarcely replied, before Mr. Collins came up to them and told her with great exultation that he had just been so fortunate as to make a most important discovery. I have found out, said he, by a singular accident, that there is now in the room a near relation of my patroness. I happened to overhear the gentleman himself mentioning to the young lady who does the honours of this house the names of his cousin, Miss de Borrow, and of her mother, Lady Catherine. How wonderfully these sorts of things occur! Who would have thought of my meeting with, perhaps, a nephew of Lady Catherine de Borrow in this assembly? I am most thankful that the discovery is made in time for me to pay my respects to him, which I am now going to do, and trust he will excuse my not having done it before. My total ignorance of the connection must plead my apology. So I assume he's talking about Darcy. I think. Yep, okay. You're not going to introduce yourself to Mr. Darcy. Indeed I am. I shall entreat his pardon for not having done it earlier. I believe him to be Lady Catherine's nephew. It will be in my power to assure him that her ladyship was quite well yesterday's sennight. I know I looked that up before, but I don't remember what it is. I thought... wait. What's the situation here? So, is it another, is Darcy her nephew, and she wants her nephew to marry her daughter? Is that the situation, or am I misunderstanding? Because I was not getting that from before, but I maybe should have. Maybe I was not catching it. Elizabeth tried hard to dissuade him from such a scheme, assuring him that Mr. Darcy would consider his addressing him without introduction as an impertinent freedom, rather than a compliment to his aunt, that it was not in the least necessary there should be any notice on either side, and that if there were, it must belong to Mr. Darcy, the superior in consequence, to begin the acquaintance. I'm so confused as to how introductions work in this world, because it seemed like at first that it was like, okay, a man, has to introduce his, wife or daughters to another man, that the wife and daughters can't go say hi on their own. But this is like a man talking to another man, and so I don't understand how the introductions work. And like the other thing is they could introduce themselves at like the other dance and stuff. So there wasn't an issue or a need for introduction. So I don't know what the rules are.
Hello, kitty. You want to come sit with me?
Can you see him? No, you can't. Oh, maybe in a sec. There's his face.
There's the kitty face. Yeah. Come here. There he is. There's the kitty bow. You're so cute. Have you come to snuggle? Have you come to snuggle? No, he's purring. I don't know if you can hear it, but he's purring.
And then I think he stopped immediately after.
What's that about? Kitty. You are so cute. Hi. Hi there. Face smush. Face smush. Aw, you're so cute. What's he doing? What's he doing, little kitty bow? There you go. There's some more purrs.
Oh, now the table's in the way, so you can't see his full face.
Oh, there's a face.
I wish I could show both of us in the same shot. Okay. Mr. Collins listened to her with the determined air of following his own inclination, and when she ceased speaking, replied thus. Yeah, he answered, he listened with the determined air of following his own inclination. I feel like that's a great way to describe that, where it's like, yeah, he listened with the determined air of someone who is going to do what they want to do. My dear Miss Elizabeth, I have the highest opinion in the world of your excellent judgment in all matters, within the scope of your understanding. Oh, I don't like where this is going. But permit me to say that there must be a wide difference between the established forms of ceremony amongst the laity, and those which regulate the clergy. Forgive me leave to observe that I consider the clerical office as equal in point of dignity with the highest rank of the kingdom. Oh boy. Provided that a proper humility of behavior is at the same time maintained. You must therefore allow me to follow the dictates of my conscience on this occasion, which lead me to perform what I look on as a point of duty. Pardon me for neglecting to profit by your advice, which on every other subject shall be my constant guide. Though in the case before us, I consider myself more fitted by education and habitual study to decide on what is right than a young lady like yourself. And with a low bow, he left her to attack Mr. Darcy, whose reception on his advances she eagerly watched, and whose astonishment at being so addressed was very evident. Her cousin prefaced his speech with a solemn bow, and though she could not hear a word of it, she felt as if hearing it all. Wait.
Whoa, kitty! Are you okay?
That was weird. Where was I? Yeah. Oh, this is long. Her cousin prefaced his speech with a solemn bow, and though she could not hear a word of it, she felt as if hearing it all, and saw in the motion of his lips the words apology, Hunsford, and Lady Catherine de Borough. It vexed her to see him expose himself to such a man. Mr. Darcy was eyeing him with unrestrained wonder, and when at last Mr. Collins allowed him time to speak, replied with an air of distant civility. Mr. Collins, however, was not discouraged from speaking again, and Mr. Darcy's contempt seemed abundantly increasing with the length of his second speech, and at the end of it he only made him a slight bow and moved another way. Mr. Collins then returned to Elizabeth. Okay, let me reread that a little bit. Yeah, so first of all, he's being like, yeah, I know better than you, because, you know, I don't know if it's a misogynistic thing, but it kind of reads that way, that it's like, I'm a man, I know better. And then it's also like him saying, oh yeah, the clergy, like, we're the highest in the kingdom. And it's like, I don't know that you are, man. I don't know what it means by whose astonishment in... Oh, I think I read that as admonishment, but whose astonishment at being so addressed was very evident. So he was shocked that he addressed him. It's odd that Elizabeth cares. I would have thought she would be like, yeah, go talk to him, make a fool of yourself. I'm surprised that she wants to, like, protect him somehow. And so Mr. Darcy's, like, polite at first, and then he's like, no, I don't want to talk to you, and gets more annoyed, I guess, as the conversation continues on. I have no reason, I assure you, said he, to be dissatisfied with my reception. Mr. Darcy seemed much pleased at the attention. He answered me with the utmost civility, and even paid me the compliment of saying that he was so well convinced of Lady Catherine's discernment as to be certain she could never bestow a favour unworthily. It was really a very handsome thought. Upon the whole, I am much pleased with him. I am curious about that. I wonder if he actually said that, or he actually meant that, you know? If he's like, oh yeah, like, I trust Lady Catherine's judgment, and like, maybe internally he's like, yep, you're just as prideful as she is, you know? Or if he actually likes her. As Elizabeth was no longer any interest of her... had no longer any interest of her own to pursue, she turned her attention almost entirely on her sister and Mr. Bingley, and the train of agreeable reflections which her observations gave birth to made her perhaps almost as happy as Jane. She saw her, in idea, settled in that very house in all the felicity which a marriage of true affection can bestow, and she felt capable, under such circumstances, endeavouring even to like Mr. Bingley's two sisters. Interesting. So she might be okay with the sisters because she knows Jane will be happy. That's cute. Her mother's thoughts, she plainly saw, were bent in the same way, and she determined not to venture near her. Oh, I didn't know the mom was there. Lest she might hear too much. When they sat down to supper, therefore, she considered it a most unlucky perverseness, which placed them within one of each other, and deeply was she vexed to find that her mother was talking to that one person, Lady Lucas, freely, openly, and of nothing else but of her expectation that Jane would soon be married to Mr. Bingley. It was an animating subject, and Mrs. Bennet seemed incapable of fatigue while enumerating the advantages of the match. His being such a charming young man, and so rich, and living but 3 miles from them, were the first points of self-gratulation. And then it was such a comfort to think how fond the two sisters were of Jane, and to be certain that they must desire the connection as much as she could do. It was, moreover, such a promising thing for her younger daughters, as Jane marrying so greatly must throw them in the way of other rich men. And lastly, it was so pleasant at her time of life to be able to consign her single daughters to the care of their sister, that she might not be obliged to go into company more than she liked. It was necessary to make this circumstance a matter of pleasure, because such occasions it is the etiquette, but no one was less likely than Mrs. Bennet to find comfort in staying at home at any period of her life. She concluded with many good wishes that Lady Lucas might soon be equally fortunate, though evidently and triumphantly believing that there is no chance of it. I'm trying to remember, because is Lady Lucas married or not? I don't remember. Or maybe it's her daughters that we're talking about? Like, Lady Lucas and Charlotte might be the daughter. And then she's saying, like, okay, once my daughters are married, I can sit at home, I guess. In vain did Elizabeth endeavour to check the rapidity of her mother's words, or persuade her to describe her felicity in a less audible whisper, for to her inexpressible vexation, she could perceive that the chief of it was overheard by Mr. Darcy, who sat opposite to them. Amazing. Her mother only scolded her for being nonsensical. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, poor kitty.
Now he's not making noise. What is Mr. Darcy to me, pray, that I should be afraid of him? I am sure we owe him no such particular civility as to be obliged to say nothing he may not like to hear. That is a weird thing to say when he can hear it. For heaven's sake, madam, speak lower. What advantage can it be to you to offend Mr. Darcy? You will never recommend yourself to his friend by so doing. Again, now you're talking about him in front of him. This is worse than what they were doing before. Nothing that she could say, however, had any influence. Her mother would talk of her views in the same intelligible tone. Elizabeth blushed and blushed again with shame and vexation. She could not help frequently glancing her eye at Mr. Darcy, though every glance convinced her of what she dreaded, for though he was not always looking at her mother, she was convinced that his attention was invariably fixed on her. The expressions on his face changed gradually from indignant contempt to a composed and steady gravity. I'm just imagining, like, I can't do it so well with this because it's a straw, but I'm just imagining they're like, oh yes, like Jane will be married to Mr. Bingley, and then Darcy's over here like, some tea we're getting here. But I don't know why he would be contemptuous. Like, what problem does he have with Jane and Bingley getting married? Like, they seem like a great match, and I don't know why he'd take issue with it, especially because it would make him see Elizabeth more and maybe have a better chance with her. I also don't know what gravity means. They've used that word a couple of times. I mean, I know what gravity means, in our world. But in their world, I don't know, like, an expression of gravity. Like, it kind of seems like he's, like, contemptuous. He's like, ugh, and then he's just, like, kind of a resigned, like, okay, like, I don't like this kind of thing. But I don't know for sure if that's what it means. At length, however, Mrs. Bennet had no more to say, and Lady Lucas, who had been long yawning at the repetition of delights which she had no likelihood of sharing, was left to the comforts of cold ham and chicken. Oh, poor Lady Lucas. That she's just, like, having to listen to Mrs. Bennet go on and on about things that she does not share in happiness for, and she doesn't get to eat, and so she just turns to her cold chicken, sadly. You mean, like, a statement is weighty? I mean, it works for, like, a statement, but it's the fact that it's being used on an expression that makes me unsure what it means. That his face changed gradually from indignant contempt to a composed and steady gravity. So, like, what is that face? What is that expression exactly? Okay, Elizabeth now began to revive. I'm just imagining, like, I don't know, air pump, like, getting air back into her. It's like, okay, I can come back to life now. Different conjugation of grave. Oh, yeah, that makes more sense, that his expression looks grave. Okay, I can picture that better then. Thank you. But not long was the interval of tranquility, for when supper was over, singing was talked of, and she had the mortification of seeing Mary, after very little entreaty, preparing to oblige the company. By many significant looks and silent entreaties did she endeavour to prevent such a proof of complaisance. But in vain. Mary would not understand them. Such an opportunity of exhibiting was delightful to her. She began her song. Elizabeth's eyes were fixed on her with most painful sensations, and she watched her progress through the several stanzas with an impatience which was very ill rewarded at their close. For Mary, on receiving almost amongst the thanks of the table the hint of a hope that she might be prevailed on to favour them again, after the pause of half a minute, began another. Mary's powers were by no means fitted for such a display. Her voice was weak, and her manner affected. Elizabeth was in agonies. Multiple agonies. She looked at Jane to see how she bore it, but Jane was very composedly talking to Bingley. She looked at his two sisters, saw them making signs of derision at each other, and at Darcy, who continued, however impenetrably grave. Hey, it got confirmed! It was confirmed it was grave. She looked at her father to entreat his interference, lest Mary should be singing all night. He took... I love how she looked at her dad like, we know that Mr. Bennet thinks his other daughters are basic, and so Elizabeth would be like, get her off the stage, Dad! We both know that she's terrible! I got the right. Alright, what was the last phrase? He took the hint. Okay, so he took the hint, and when Mary had finished her second song, said aloud, "That will do extremely well, child." That will do extremely well. We're good. You have delighted us long enough. Let the other young ladies have time to exhibit. Mary, though pretending not to hear, was somewhat disconcerted. Elizabeth, sorry for her, and sorry for her father's speech, was afraid her anxiety had done no good. Others of the party were now applied to. If I, said Mr. Collins, were so fortunate as to be able to sing, I should have great pleasure, I'm sure, in obliging the company with an air, for I consider music as a very innocent diversion, and perfectly compatible with the profession of a clergyman. I do not mean, however, to assert that we can be justified in devoting too much of our time to music, for there are certainly other things to be attended to. The rector of a parish has much to do. In the first place, he must make such an agreement for tithes as may be beneficial to himself and not offensive to his patron. He must write his own sermons, and the time that remains will not be too much for his parish duties. And the care and improvement of his dwelling, which he cannot be excused from making as comfortable as possible. And I do not think it of light importance that he should have attentive and conciliatory manners towards everybody, especially towards those to whom he owes his preferment. I cannot acquit him of that duty, nor could I think well of the man who should omit an occasion of testifying his respect towards anybody connected with their family. And with a bow to Mr. Darcy, he concluded his speech, which had been spoken so loud as to be heard by half the room. Mary stared. Mary smiled. Many smiled. Mary stared. Many smiled. But no one looked more amused than Mr. Bennet himself, while his wife seriously commended Mr. Collins for having spoken so sensibly, and observed in a half-whisper to Lady Lucas that he was a remarkably clever, good kind of young man. So let me get this straight. So Mary sings. She's not doing so great a job. Lizzie gives a significant glance to her dad, and her dad's like, "Hey, Mary, you're good. That was great. You're done." And she gets off the stage, and they're like, "All right, anybody else want to sing?" And then Mr. Collins is like, I can't sing." And then he gives like a great speech about how like singing is a great profession for clergymen. When nobody asked, when people are asking somebody to sing, and he's giving this long speech about why he's not going to sing, and then Mrs. Bennet thinks it's great. Like, I guess Mrs. Bennet is just like, oh, like I want Elizabeth to marry him, and so it's like, isn't he great? But like, did I get that right? He's making a speech nobody asked for or wants. That doesn't answer the question. To Elizabeth, it appeared that had her family made an agreement to expose themselves as much as they could during the evening, it would have been impossible for them to play their parts with more spirit or finer success. And happy did she think it for Bingley and her sister that some of the exhibition had escaped his notice, and that his feelings were not of a sort to be much distressed by the folly which he must have witnessed. That his two sisters and Mr. Darcy, however, should have such an opportunity of ridiculing her relations was bad enough, and she could not determine whether the silent contempt of the gentlemen or the insolent smiles of the ladies were more intolerable. I still don't get why Darcy has contempt for her, because he's just it's just all been good things, all good things about Jane and Bingley. The author is putting in the work on making this guy someone we don't like. Yeah, absolutely. The rest of the evening brought her little amusement. She was teased by Mr. Collins, who continued most perseveringly by her side. And though he could not prevail with her to dance with him again, put it out of her power to dance with others. In vain, she did entreat him to stand up with somebody else and offer to introduce him to any young lady in the room. He assured her that, as to dancing, he was perfectly indifferent to it, and his chief object was by delicate attentions to recommend himself to her, and that he should therefore make a point of remaining close to her the whole evening. Oh gosh, there was no arguing upon such a project. She owed her greatest relief to her friend Miss Lucas, who often joined them, and good-naturedly engaged Mr. Collins's conversation to herself. She was at least free from the offence of Mr. Darcy's farther notice, though often standing within a very short distance of her, quite disengaged. He never came near enough to speak. She felt it to be the probable consequence of her allusions to Mr. Wickham, and rejoiced in it. The Longbourn party were the last of all the company to depart, and by a manoeuvre of Mrs. Bennet had to wait for their carriages a quarter of an hour after everybody else was gone, which gave them time to see how heartily they were wished away by some of the family. Mrs. Hurst and her sister scarcely opened their mouths except to complain of fatigue, and were evidently impatient to have the house to themselves. They repulsed every attempt of Mrs. Bennet at conversation, and by so doing threw a languor over the whole party, which was very little relieved by the long speeches of Mr. Collins, who was complimenting Mr. Bingley and his sisters on the elegance of their entertainment, and the hospitality and politeness which had marked their behaviour to their guests. Darcy said nothing at all. Mr. Bennet, in equal silence, was enjoying the scene. Mr. Bennet's the one being like... Amazing. I lost my place. Mr. Bingley and Jane were standing together, a little detached from the rest, and talking only to each other. At least they're having fun. At least they're having a good time. Elizabeth preserved as steady a silence as either Mrs. Hurst or Miss Bingley, and even Lydia was too much fatigued to utter more than the occasional explanation of, "Lord, how tired I am," accompanied by a violent yawn. I love that. Very violent yawn. Amazing. I assume that means something like, like really exaggerating it. When at length they arose to take leave, Mrs. Bennet was most pressingly civil in her hope of seeing the whole family soon at Longbourn, and addressed herself particularly to Mr. Bingley, to assure him how happy he would make them by eating a family dinner with them at any time, without the ceremony of a formal invitation. Bingley was all grateful pleasure, and he readily engaged for taking the earliest opportunity of waiting on her, after his return from London, whither he was obliged to go the next day for a short time. Mrs. Bennet was perfectly satisfied, and quitted the house under the delightful persuasion that, allowing for the necessary preparation of settlements, new carriages, and wedding clothes, she should undoubtedly see her daughter settled at Netherfield in the course of 3 or 4 months. I don't think I read that right, but okay. Of having another daughter married to Mr. Collins, she thought with equal certainty, and with considerable, though not equal, pleasure. Elizabeth was the least dear to her of all her children. Oh! And though the man and the match were quite good enough for her, the worth of each was eclipsed by Mr. Bingley and Netherfield. Interesting! I was not expecting that at all. Mrs. Bennet seemed so much more... It seemed like she liked them all equally, and it was just Mr. Bennet who favored Elizabeth. Well, Mr. Bennet looks way better now. Like, instead of him being like, they're all basic except for Elizabeth, it could be more of, like, Mrs. Bennet is like, they're all great except for Elizabeth. And so Mr. Bennet has to pick up the slack and be like, Elizabeth is my girl, I need to dote on her. That is wild. I wonder why, she thinks that. It has been 2 hours. That is generally how long the longest of my my Pride and Prejudice streams are. Give me just a second. Here, let me see if I can show. See if I can show the. Well, you can see his bum. You can see his belly and his bum, but his head is covered by the table. But yes, I think I will call it there. Collins it. That was really fun. That was great to. That was great to get to the ball at long last. We have been waiting for that for a while. I still, my favorite part is still the, like, I'm not gonna talk to him, I'm not gonna interact with him. Hey, you wanna dance? Yes! That is still the best part to me. I'm really curious. I really hope that we get to quickly learn why Mr. Darcy felt contempt when he overheard them talking about Mr. Bingley and Jane getting married. So hopefully that is one thing I like about this story, is that they get to things quickly. That each time I think, like, oh, like, we're not going to meet for a while, or we're not going to get answers to that for a while, we get them in the next chapter, which really helps it be engaging and interesting to continue. So hopefully we'll get some answers to that in the next chapter. We'll see. But this was very fun. I hope that you guys have enjoyed it. I certainly have. But I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.